Hi, I'm Rose, and today I want to talk about woodworking, specifically using basic hand tools to accomplish basically anything. In today's video, I'm going to be using my good old trusty buck knife here, a straight file, a round file, a half round file, and a triangle file, as well as some sandpaper and some finishing products to build something. Before we begin, I would like to talk about wood as a material. What wood is large strands. I guess we call them strands and fibers. Really, they're stacks of cells held together by a binding agent called lignin. Now, these strands of fibers of wood do not always line up perfectly, but they do generally go in the same direction. We call that direction the grain of the wood. When people talk about wood grain, they'll either talk about going along the grain, which means down the strands, or across the grain, which means cutting across them. Cutting tools, such as our knife, are excellent at going down along the grain to split wood apart. We call these splits shavings, typically. And this is the process of whittling. You can also cut fine lines sharply across grain. This is much more difficult. Abrasive tools, like our files, however, are excellent at cutting across grains. They can also be used to flatten out and smooth over that same grain structure to create a fine and smooth surface. However, the end grain, which is what we call the end of those strands, is easily broken apart by files going over, creating ugly, torn out sections at the end. So always, when going to the end grain, go from the sides of your grain over. All wood will have voids going down its grain. This is unavoidable and mostly exists on the microscopic scale. This is what finishing products, such as oil and wax, are for. They fill in this space and seal it so that no water can get in. Differences in moisture will gradually split apart any opening. The first step is to find a piece of wood somewhere and then split it. Pick your favorite side, and then dispose of the other. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take our knife and we're going to smooth out all of this. Try to create a fairly flat surface, free of splinters, along this face. Now that that's done, we can get rid of our knife and start looking at our files. We've created a fairly smooth surface here, but it's not quite flat. And that's what we're going to improve with the flat file. Now that we've finished with that, what we're going to do is break our edges. By break our edges, I mean we're going to round them all off with the file, which will make them stronger and less likely to catch on things. Sticking with our straight file, we're going to start defining our kind of handle section down here by narrowing this in. So now I want to start shaping the handle out a bit better and giving it some actual definition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start cutting some grooves into it. And for that, I'm going to use the triangle file. I'm going to grab it, see about where my fingers line up. Then I'm going to start carving a line across at each point. It's time to finally move on to the round file. And what we're going to do is we're just going to follow along these lines we've made and chase them from the front over the side. Well, I couldn't quite help myself but add in an extra little notch there to be fancy. Next, however, what we're going to do is we're going to take our half round file and we're going to widen all these out and open them up. Now these have opened up and actually fit our fingers all right, I think it's time to move down here. And what I'm going to do is just kind of use every file and shape this out to make it something a bit decorative and nice. So as this comes together, I want to try to preserve as much of this kind of natural curve from the split as I can on this lobe we're creating here. Unfortunately up here there are some seams of some rather nasty softwood. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a file and I'm going to carve those out. Now that we've taken out some of our rot and given these nice deep grooves, what we're going to do is we're going to come over to the back and we're just going to flatten out all our high spots sticking out of the wood with the good old flat file. Yeah, that's nice. To produce this so far, we've used our files primarily. Files are abrasive tools and, well, as I've demonstrated, they come in many different shapes. They're all pretty much the same. They're a textured piece of metal that has ridges cut into it, or formed into it in some various way. There's different means. And those drag along a surface, and those little ridges, or teeth, or knobs, or grooves catch a hold of material that's sticking up and rip it off. And since there's so many teeth, and they're so small, it creates what we perceive as a smooth surface. These files are made that way, though, but there are other forms of abrasive tools that really do the same thing. This file, or rasp if you will, is made out of different saws. This saw uses an abrasive wire to cut. This sponge has an abrasive grit on it. This sandpaper has thousands of teeth. Our ancestors used to use different textures of rock to accomplish the same thing, or even shark skin. My point being that while we have different forms and different names for these tools, they're all really the same thing. They're abrasion. And abrasive tools are the most precise and the most effective means, really, we have of forming anything. The disadvantage is it's quite slow. And at long last, we're finally ready to start finishing. In order to do that, we're going to use a whole mess of different grits of sandpaper, some oil, some wax, maybe a little fire, and to start off with, this sponge, which is also sandpaper. And as you can see, it has many different shapes to it. What we're going to do is we're going to follow through all of our grooves and channels and on every shape we've made, even the ones from the split. We're going to smooth them all out with this. If you don't want to buy a sponge, you can always just get some coarse grit sandpaper and wrap it around a regular kitchen sponge. It'll work just fine. We're done with our sponge, so now we're going to go through 180, 220, and then 320 grit sandpaper just over this front face, not touching the back side. Just fold in a nice corner, like so, and occasionally double it if you need it thicker, to get into these little grooves, like so. Next, I think we're going to burn her. Get some nice color. In order to do that, I'm going to use a rocket stove. I made this one out of an old coffee can. I just drilled some holes down through the lower bit. We're going to fill this with sticks and some kindling and get her going. Now, if you've never made a fire before, it's really quite simple. You just got to split yourself some wood. You thought I wasn't going to show you how. Take this, take your knife, take them on, and just bounce them together a couple times till you get a little set cut going. Then, you're going to take another piece of wood, you're just going to start smacking down it. Now be careful to only use another piece of wood and not a stone or metal implement, or you'll damage your knife. Take some of your sticks and just whittle some stuff off. These are going to become our kindling. What we've really been doing is increasing the surface area of the dry wood. And by doing that, we've increased the amount of space that oxygen has to react with it as we add heat, producing our flame. To load up our stove, just add your kindling on the bottom. Then we're going to go somewhere safe with some water and nothing readily burnable around. We're going to start those, and once they get going, we're going to rapidly add in sticks, like so. We'll build up a small flame, but a tall one. Now, since we're burned, we're going to add our oil in. And get our first coat of color going. Now, oil is both a sealant, and it works kind of as a congealing agent. which is important because we're not done sanding yet either. We're going to oil front and back. Now, once you let your oil dry, which in my experience, this will take about an hour, you could just leave it there. This is done, but we're going to go further. Now that our oil is dried up and set, I'm going to move on to the 400 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to clean up the front and the back this time. Next comes the wax. This is a mix of beeswax and carnauba wax, which should go on quite thick. We're going to put this on, just soak everything in it. And then, after it dries up a bit, we're going to buff it with some 600 grit sandpaper. And then again, with some 1000. Do not be afraid to be very generous. Once the wax is dried up and hardened, at least on the flat surfaces and not necessarily down in the grooves, we're going to take our 600 grit sandpaper and we're just going to start buffing everything. We don't have to go over any of it for a particularly long amount of time. And then the 1000 grit. So yeah, looks like we're just about done.
Old Spanky, can you believe they ever used something like this?
Thanks for tuning in and watching. This has been a simple tutorial on how to use files and abrasion tools in general. Tune in next time, guys, and well, have a good day.